Okay, hello everybody. Nice to be here. Pleasure to join you. I'm recovering from a bad cough and cold, and I just spent the whole night on a train coming down from Sydney. I got about 2 hours sleep, so I hope I'll get through it all. I'm going to do an introduction, and then I'll turn it over to Peter, followed by Margaret, and then come back to me to close things up. I'll begin by saying back in the 1980s, probably before many of you were born, I was working at the Australia Council, the federal government's arts funding and policy advisory body, and I took the opportunity to explore the state of Australia's circus industry as it had never been explored before. Looked down by many as theatre's poor cousin, circus sat uncomfortably alongside other branches of the performing arts. There was, of course, a contemporary or new wave circus movement underway as groups such as Circus Oz and the Flying Fruit Fly Circus had begun attracting public attention. However, Australia's traditional circus companies, some established for over 100 years, had to survive without recourse to public funding, often facing severe council restrictions and the antagonism of the animal liberation movement. In the survey I carried out in 1986, I was amazed to find that there were about 60 circus groups active throughout Australia, from the so-called traditional circus groups at one extreme to the contemporary new wave at the other. And in between there were numerous community-oriented circus groups. All looked as though they had something to offer, but all lacked a common voice that could articulate their collective strength and identify their collective needs and common objectives. In 1987, I put a position paper to the then Theatre Board of the Australia Council to argue the case for a national conference of Australia's circus people. Well received, my position paper ultimately led to the convening in 1990 of Australia's first Circus Summit, which is the ancestor of today's Circus Summit, Australia's first national conference of circus people. Held at the Arts Centre, the Circus Summit, the first Circus Summit attracted 160 delegates from all over around Australia, representing the traditional, community and contemporary genres of circus, gathered to identify their common grievances and challenges, needs and aspirations. As well, representatives of bodies not always partial to circus, such as the arts funding bodies, the town councils and animal liberation activists, were invited to attend and put their cases forward. If subsequent developments are any guide, it proved decisive in securing the continuing growth and development of circus in Australia. If the original Circus Summit did not cause things to happen, it certainly accelerated some developments already in progress. Perhaps most importantly, by the end of the last decade of the 20th century, Australia had what it had never had before, an accredited national school dedicated to the circus arts, which we call NICA. Today, some 35 years after the first Circus Summit, the Australian circus industry has been revolutionised well beyond anything recognisable in 1990, and circus is recognised as a legitimate and valued branch of the arts community. Today, I and my co-presenters, Dr. Peter Tate and Dr. Margaret Curdy, will again take up the cudgels, as each of us has at various times over the years to argue not only the importance of circus, but the importance of collecting, appreciating and disseminating the history of circus. Each panellist, each published in the field of circus history, articulates her or his perspective on the rapidly emerging field of circus history studies. Collectively, we will present the case for fostering the growth, dissemination and appreciation of research as the means to preserve the heritage of the circus past, contextualise the breadth and depth of the circus present, and identify strategies to serve circus future and secure its place and relevance in a rapidly changing world. I might owe something to Charles Dickens and his book about Christmas past, present and future when I wrote that, but thanks Charles Dickens. Peter will explore concepts of the sustainability of circus practice in relation to ecological sustainability and a climate change future. In what ways is 21st century circus going forward being expressly aligned with natural ecologies and a climate? And Margaret will articulate the importance of circus mobility and circus memory to the future of circus. Today, circus performers may not feel their history is relevant to them, but tomorrow they might. Whether they are conscious of it or not, this history is part of their circus identity, both locally and globally, eliminating their place in a continuing circus tradition that is forever evolving. And I will come on at the end. I will argue that the time has arrived to establish a National Circus Documentation Resource Centre, advocate an honoured place for circus skills in the modern Olympic Games, and assert the value and relevance of a vibrant circus industry the pursuit of wider national objectives such as health, education, welfare and identity. So with those words, I'll turn things over firstly to Peter, who will then be followed by Margaret, and I'll come back and finish things off.
Slide, PowerPoint, thanks. Have you got another one there? That's Mark's. Hi everyone. Thank you so much to David and members of the team for the opportunity to be here at NICA at a conference. That's fantastic. I've been involved with NICA in its earlier history, mostly on curriculum committees for most sins. I do have a professional background in writing on the history of circus. A History of Trapeze was my first book, and then I've written on trained animals and menagerie animals from an animal studies critical perspective. My current research, though, is exploring how circus encompasses environmental concerns, including climate change. While I define circus futures are bound up with the future of humanity and other species, is what I would say here, my main point. While I define circus as acrobatic performance with apparatus, and remember the mat is apparatus, I also recognise that circus form and content are typified by constant change. And to engage audience interests, the social context is always relevant to circus. Yet, when I went looking, circus performance is not apparent in the discussion of the arts focused on climate change, even as there are numerous projects that I could find reflecting these concerns. And I would argue that circus has long held non-human significance, obviously through the association with animals, which contributes to its visceral impact, its affect, emotional feeling and mood. In relation to public perception then, how is 21st century being expressly aligned with non-human ecologies and climate? Small group performance might seem to be a logical response to being ecologically sustainable, but all circus, big and small, can address the ecological damage that we're living with and the crisis that humanity faces. Circus happened in tents and outdoor environments, so it prompts curiosity as to how elemental forces and the weather shaped its production and or influenced the content. Artistic work can contribute to human understanding of what Donna Haraway calls nature culture, that thing coming together. But I contend that circus in particular offers a complex, interactive human and non-human hybridity through its physical action and content as it elicits nervous anxiety from audiences, viscerally and cognitively. This creates a particular circus mode of concern for risk and the safety of others. Read, the safety of others, future generations. So the capacity to cross species boundaries characterises the malleability of acrobatic bodies, and the contemporary free circus continues to play with species blurring in the 21st century, which sets it apart from theatre or other theatrical performance. And I'm going to quote Francesca Trapp on the idea of form, where she says, in relation to contemporary circus, paradigm shifts with them comes the challenge of clearly differentiating circus from other art forms and the internal classification of subgenres. So circus is an important performance form for the future. because it blurs human and non-human separation, as it evokes concern for the safety of others. And I'm hoping that I can inspire future circuits by offering examples of some quite recent circus on climate change that I've found, some of which you'll know. How many people saw the 2019 Circus Oz show? Is there any hands up? I can't see, the lights are in my eyes. But so Aurora, directed by Kate Fryer, focused throughout on climate change in what is described as a highly political and opinionated piece that nonetheless injected fun and remained hopeful, that essential element when you're talking, can you hear me? When you're talking about climate change. And the title refers to the southern Australis and the northern Borealis lights. And the show featured human-sized penguins from Antarctica on trapeze and a singing, talking polar bear, Tara Silcott. The human bear repeatedly appeared and did acrobatic action and a clever trick of taking a plastic bag from the stomach. And it was reviewed by Tim Byrne as genuine, it feels genuinely political, although the message is integrated into the substructure of its acts. So it's not telling the audience, it's giving it to them in a non-verbal way. The circus skills reinforce the non-verbal message. So a performer on straps was a hunter trying to shoot a bear, a performer upside down in Trapeze Washington Act wore a gas mask, and a performer on a rope was cleaning up litter. Ice sheet came from digital displays. So it shows the absurdity of the human inability to reduce carbon emissions and environmental pollution and damage. Humour makes this type of message enjoyable. But it also suggests the global interconnection as it points to the foreseeable changes in the weather that will affect the northern and southern lights, and not to mention the local habitats. So Circus presents important, crucial political issues in highly memorable ways. I want to give you an example from France. Some of you might know of Bruno Latour. So this was happening prior to the 2015 COP, Conference of the Parties of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And it was a collaboration between philosopher Bruno Latour and Pierre d'Albigny in the creation of Gaia Global Circus. And it was a series of vignettes that were performed in a flying tent that you can just see there with a silk roof as apparatus that created a shelter, a shade, a big top, a safety blanket, a funeral shroud. So the performance style ranged from slapstick to allegory. It amused and shocked. Now, Latour's 8 lectures from around this time revisit Lovelock's Gaia theory in relation to climate change in the Anthropocene to point out that the human is inseparable from the non-human world. And Latour is concerned about the gap between, so am I, emotional feeling about the consequences of climate change and the stalled adjustment to the unfolding reality. He's famous for his idea of a kind of flattened network between people, objects, substances, and elements, and that does suit Circus and analysis of Circus. So Gaia Global Circus was influenced by Latour's thinking of dialogic exchange and the attribution of agency to non-human entities, so that the environment, such as an ocean, should have a comparable status to a nation state and therefore COP delegate rights. It's maybe coming here next year, with the atmosphere listed before Australia. The attributing of rights to non-human environments is acceptable to a circus world, or a world as circus, in which absurdly comic and dangerous precariousness indicate climate change. Now, I'm moving to the other examples I've found quite briefly, which were in the Nordic countries. And the two that I'm highlighting just today, one called from 2019, Into the Water, which took place on the deck of a sailing ship and on two masts. And it highlights the interconnection between water and life and new ways of working and performing for the artists on a ship. And it shows them, images show them in a 3-tier shoulder balance at the front of the ship and aerial work on ropes off masts, as well as clowning and flippers on the deck. The second one is ripples that some of you might have heard about. Again, this was coming out of Denmark with director Han Fries and was about overcoming, in a different turn, to ecological grief. And this comes from 2022, and it was performed on a 2-mast sailing ship that provides a site-specific stage in a harbour so the audience is viewing from the dock. And it's also a mode of transport, and as well as providing accommodation and minimising carbon emissions in travel for performers. Audiences are invited to become participants in a mourning loss ritual for past damage and to question the present and to look to more hopeful moments for the future. What can Circus contribute to understanding approaches to climate change? 21st century circus arts can highlight how even political shows require disciplined collaboration and body practices. If only the COPs, Conference of the Parties, would collaborate, if only the politicians would collaborate. Circus might look like chaos in performance, but it comes out of a very disciplined, collaborative process. Contemporary circus productions convey the absurdity of human behaviour as they demonstrate how risk and danger must be faced. They evoke contradictory emotional effects in life that are comparable to those arising with climate change, and the circus is always excitement and fear. Circus challenges, and stating then again our core belief that somehow we're separate from nature rather than part of it, integral to it, as our First Nations philosophers and thinkers and communities will tell us. So I'll stop there and pass over now to Margaret. Thank you very much.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. I was sort of roped in at the last minute, I think, because Gillian or Ricky couldn't make it. But I'm very, very grateful to be here and on sharing the stage with these two eminent circus historians. So my name is Margaret Kirby, and I am a circus historian, a historical fiction writer, a former circus performer and teacher. And I've discovered more recently that I have circus performers, professional circus performers in my family history, so that caught my attention. So today, I want to respond to the question, what is the future of circus research, especially the future of research into the historical circus, because that's my focus. I'd like to say we are in a revolutionary moment. The tools we now have to study circus history, especially digitised archives, are transforming what is possible. They are changing how we understand and are able to access the past, and therefore how we imagine the circus in the past, the present, and in the future. So circus has always been a transnational art form. Almost from its beginning in 18th century Britain, in 1768, the entertainment travelled. Philip Astley was touring provincial UK within a year of first opening his riding school in Surrey, had reached Dublin by 1773 and crossed international boundaries, arriving in Paris in 1774, just 6 years after the first circuses as an art form emerged. This new entertainment quickly spread. Soon circus amphitheatres were being built throughout England, Europe, the United States and Russia. Circus companies and individual performers moved between these venues, creating an informal and ever-expanding circuit. Eventually, these extended throughout the United Kingdom and Europe, west across the Atlantic to the United States, Central and South America, and east to the Ottoman Empire and Asia. Circus could be enjoyed in Paris, in Dublin, in St. Petersburg, in Krakow, in Calcutta, because the enjoyment of the entertainment relied on spectacle, principally on spectacle rather than speech. Circus companies everywhere were composed of performers of many national origins. The circus community inherently was, and I'd argue still is, an international network of companies and performers who are linked over time and geographical space in countless and often surprising ways. But for circus historians, until very recently, this has been created a real difficulty. Circus companies have mainly left traces of their activities, especially historical 19th century, which is my area, in historical newspapers. Those papers carried advertisements, reviews, shipping notices, correspondence, even gossip, and court cases. They are the bread and butter of circus history. But when a company travelled beyond the reach of the home newspapers, of the newspapers easily available to scholars, they effectively could disappear from the record. Whole careers could vanish from the record once performers left home. And this is why much circus history has been written in national silos. We talk about the American circus, the British circus, the Australian circus, the Russian circus, but I would argue, perhaps provocatively, that there really has never been such a thing as a national circus. Or even that idea is somewhat dubious. Circus was always transnational, always on the move. The idea of self-contained national traditions is more a reflection of the limits on research than the reality of the circus world. You might talk about flavours or preferences in particular places, but the same performers can often be found performing and adapting their performances in multiple geographical contexts. Let me illustrate this with a single example. My research has focused most extensively on Euro-American circus companies and performers who toured through colonial Asia, India and China between 1843 and 1869. Professional performers in these companies of many national origins often enjoyed careers across continents. Some were very famous in their own time. Thomas McCollum, for example, was an American equestrian born in Philadelphia in 1828. As a boy, he was apprenticed to Matthew Buckley, a respected English circus performer. By the age of 8, he was being billed as a prodigy. By 18, he was a co-proprietor of a major southern circus, Stoner McCollum's Great Western Circus. In 1851, he sailed from New York for London. He starred with the American and French Equestrian Company at the Royal Drury Lane Theatre in direct competition with the newly opened Crystal Palace. He was at the time celebrated by some as the greatest two-horse rider in the world. From his London base, he toured through Ireland, Scotland, France, Austria, Russia, Italy and Switzerland. In 1860, he sailed to Cape Town and took his circus from the Cape Colonies to Mauritius, Sri Lanka, all of India to Myanmar, Penang, Singapore, Indonesia, Hong Kong and Australia before returning via Mumbai to London, where he died in 1872. However, in one of the most important reference works of 19th century American circus history, William Slatt's Olympians of the Sawdust Circle, which is almost entirely drawn from historical American newspaper references, McCollum's biography simply ends in 1851, when he sailed from New York to Europe, just as his career was embarking internationally. Why? Because home journalists could not easily follow their local circus stars beyond home borders. Subsequently, researchers could not easily access records held in overseas repositories. Following circus companies as they performed and travelled through Asia in the 19th century has previously received limited attention by circus scholars and historians, as Peter Tate would be able to tell you. There is a very good reason for this, and I look to Professor Tate to affirm my assertion, and that is it has always been an especially difficult phenomenon in circus history to research. The colonial newspapers are mostly held in the archives of the former colonial powers, England, Netherlands, Spain, France and Portugal. Given the propensity for transnational movement of circus, another serious barricade to researching peripatetic characters can be the language in which material is written. Today, AI can overcome this barricade with relative and scary ease. I was asked to verify Thomas McCollum's presence in Russia recently. It occurred to me to turn to ChatGPT, for whom Russian Cyrillic text proves no obstacle. Within a half-hour negotiation with ChatGPT, it obligingly found mentions of McCollum in connection with Novoseletsev's St. Petersburg Theatre Circus in 1857 by Yuri Dmitriev in his 1953 work Ruski Zirk, I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, among other citations. That was quite a simple task for ChatGPT. Another more, I'll cut that one. So today, thanks to digitised archives and potentially AI as well, we can more easily follow important circus impresarios like Thomas McCollum far beyond London, across Europe and into Asia. His story no longer vanishes. McCollum shows us both the gap in older scholarship and the opportunity created by new tools. Digitisation has transformed possibilities in circus historical research. Historical newspapers are now increasingly accessible online from around the world. Public archives, shipping records, wills and probate, asylum and court records are steadily being digitised and made publicly available. International genealogical databases hold an extraordinary and growing body of archives and can reveal family ties and performer networks. Specialist circus websites such as Circopedia and Circus Parade, which focus on European circus history, are bringing together knowledge once scattered in private collections. Consider Stuart Thayer, an famous American circus historian. He spent over 20 years compiling his monumental 3-volume Annals of the American Circus, which covers the antebellum era of American circus history. His research required endless travel across America, visiting libraries in dozens of states, digging through fragile newspapers and local collections. It was heroic work, and without it we would know much less. But today what took Thayer decades can now often be done in months or just simple years. We can now work transnationally and transtemporally, tracing performers and companies across borders and centuries from our desks. It is faster, cheaper, and in many ways much more democratic. What does this mean for circus research going forward? First, it allows us to recover performers and companies, those who slipped out of the old national narratives. Second, it breaks down the silos. We no longer need to tell a rigid story of the American circus here, the British circus there, the Australian circus somewhere else. We can tell a global history of circus, one that reflects the reality of constant mobility. Third, it opens the field. More scholars in more places can access more material. This democratisation will enrich the kinds of questions we can ask and the kinds of stories we can tell. In short, digitisation will reshape not only the history of circus, but the identity of circus itself as a truly global cultural form. So let me return to where I began. We are, I believe, at a revolutionary moment in circus historical research. Digitisation has given us tools to see beyond the old boundaries, to recover forgotten lives, and to rewrite circus history on a global scale. The circus was always transnational, but only now do we have the growing means to research it globally. And I think that changes everything. Thank you.
Please keep applauding and thank Dr. Margaret Kirby, Peter Tate and Dr. Mark St. Leon.
Thank you, Aurora. Can we have my slides up, please? Okay, I've called my section here, "The Time Has Arrived." And I should mention that I do come from an old Australian circus family. I can't juggle, I can't walk a tightrope, and I can't ride a horse. But nevertheless, I am descended from this family. The chap on the left obviously has a striking resemblance to myself. And the lady on the right, once upon a time, I also had a slim waist like she did. Okay, my talk is in three parts. The first, the need for a national circus documentation centre. The character of a society's entertainments not only sheds light on the character of that society, but eventually posterity's perception of it. Between the 1830s and the 1960s, entertainments of a circus nature were an important feature of the Australian leisure landscape, especially in entertainment-deprived regional areas. Building on the model of circus established in London in the late 1700s, Australia's first circus entrepreneurs and circus families developed a viable domestic circus industry that exported as well as imported talent by the turn of the 19th century. I began the lonely task of uncovering Australia's circus history in 1969, thinking it would only take a few years of casual research. In 1969, there was no Google, there was no Trove or email to expedite my inquiries. Today, 56 years later, I'm still uncovering Australia's circus history, but fortunately have the company of a number of like-minded colleagues, such as my friends here, and enjoy the convenience of online resources and communications. Today, also unlike 1969, our libraries and archives better understand the importance that circus and other travelled entertainments have played in the construction of this new nation, Australia. However, collections are dispersed. It would be nice to see a centralised nationally designated centre for documentation and research dedicated to circus and other toured entertainments. This could be similar in scope to the Robert L. Parkinson Library and Research Centre in Wisconsin, United States, or the National Fairground Archive in Leeds in the UK. I see the following benefits flowing from a national documentation centre. We could concentrate documentation and research efforts. We could avoid duplication and improve productivity of research efforts. We could maintain real-time documentation of contemporary circus developments as they occur. We can give circus research and documentation a national image and profile, and we could foster a camaraderie between circus and like-minded researchers. Then I want to move on to the second part of my talk, a place for circus skills in the Olympic Games. Despite much written to the contrary, the modern circus was only tenuously linked to the circus of ancient Rome. Shaped elliptically, the Roman circus was dominated by spectacles such as athletic games and chariot and horse races. It was too long and too narrow for spectators to comfortably witness the more bloodthirsty spectacles such as gladiatorial combat. These entertainments could be seen within another Roman edifice called the amphitheatre, which was circular or semicircular in shape and approximated the modern concept of a circus arena. The largest of the amphitheatres was, of course, the famous Colosseum in Rome. The word Olympic, with its overtones of games and athletics, was frequently employed in early British circus advertising. In January 1842, a visiting Italian gymnast, Luigi Della Casa, opened his short-lived Australian Olympic Theatre, a tent-like pavilion in Sydney's Hunter Street. During the 1850s, almost every Australian circus proprietor took his turn at naming his circus an Olympic circus, as when Ashton's Olympic Circus turned up in Singleton in 1852. In 1880, my great-great-grandfather's circus presented the Olympian Brothers, an exhibition of strength and agility which concluded with one rider standing on the shoulders of the other as their horse carried them at a steady canter around the circus ring. The circus building that the Fitzgerald Circus brothers built on the south side of the Yarra in 1902 to house the annual Melbourne season of their famous circus was called the Olympia, after the London venue of the same name. The premises were later assumed by the Fitzgerald brothers' rivals, the Worth brothers, who retained occupancy of the building for their annual circus seasons until that edifice was destroyed by fire in 1953. Between 1951 and 1958, the Warrens, a branch of the famous Ashton family, toured Australia and New Zealand with their circus promoted as Warren Brothers Olympic Circus. But so much for the use of the word Olympic and its derivatives. Has there ever been anything tangibly Olympic about Australian circus? Yes, there has been, entirely within recent decades. In March 1978, Circus Oz gave its inaugural performance as an independent company at Melbourne's Moomba Festival and soon proved to be Australia's major contribution to the international contemporary circus movement. An early highlight of Circus Oz's arrival on the world stage was its appearance at the Los Angeles Olympic Arts Festival in 1984. A contemporary circus group which arose in its wake, the Flying Fruit Fly Circus, founded in Albury in 1979. The elements of team building, physical skills development and self-discipline, which underpin the education of youth in the Flying Fruit Fly Circus, could just as well be applied to any high school football or cricket team. In association with the Shanghai Circus School, the Fruit Flies were a feature of the Sydney 2000 Olympic Arts Festival with its production Fusion. This was not the only link between the Flying Fruit Fly Circus and the 2000 Olympics, for one of its early alumni, Emma George, had already made the transition from circus performer to Olympic pole vaulter. Interviewed in 1999, Emma made clear the reasons for her affinity for the pole vault. She says, and I quote, "I think it was originally from my circus background that got me interested, doing trapeze and towers of chairs and tumbling, and then I moved away from doing that to start doing long jumps, sprints and hurdles. I think even a background in circus that age teaches you if you're not dedicated, if you don't put in, then you're never going to succeed." Remarks such as these drew me to the conclusion that there should be a place for circus skills within the modern Olympic movement, and caused me to investigate the matter. Many of the staple circus skills we now know today, such as acrobatics, juggling, rope walking, have been practiced since ancient times, certainly. However, the ancient Olympic Games of Greece, which go back as far as the year 776 BC, almost 3,000 years ago, did not seem to embrace them. Instead, it embraced a basic menu of athletics: long jump, shot put, javelin, boxing, wrestling, and equestrian events such as horse and chariot races. Today, there is a core of 5 sports held in every Olympics: athletics, cycling, fencing, gymnastics, and swimming, each of which involves an essential criterion, which is physical exertion. In almost every Olympics, new sports are added, some are retired, and some are added back again and retired again. In recent Olympiads, we have seen the appearance of sports such as synchronised swimming, breakdancing, and skateboarding. If the modern Olympics can embrace sports like that, I see no reason why it should not embrace the artful sports of the circus, such as rope and wire walking, acrobatics and tumbling, juggling, bareback riding, trapeze, whether solo trapeze or group trapeze. The Olympic Charter states that to be accepted, a sport must add value to the Olympic movement. It must be widely practiced and appealing to younger audiences, and it must promote gender equality, have universally recognised and applied rules, and be practiced widely by men and women across several continents. There are defined procedures for proposing a new sport to the IOC's Olympic Programme Commission. The IOC session will then vote and ratify any new sports to be included. To be practiced. So, how could participation in the Olympics benefit circus? It could focus international public attention on the nuances of the circus arts, broaden the field of competition in the circus arts and raise performance quality, invite critical analysis and popular appreciation of the circus arts, foster the continuing internationalisation of circus, legitimise circus and the circus arts in the eyes of the political and social establishments, and encourage local participation in and development of the circus arts. So those are some ideas. I think that circus skills do have a place in the Olympics. So if anyone wants to take up the cudgels, I'll be glad to support them. To bring my talk to a close, I want to talk about the relevance of a vibrant circus industry to the pursuit of wider national objectives. Australia's agreeable climate provided a rationale for both sporting achievement and an energetic circus industry. Although each form of entertainment developed along its own path, Australian sport and Australian circus have shared common defining characteristics, especially with regard to athletics and display. Each has touched the perimeters of each other. The Australian circus experience shows that aspects of sport, at least if not sport itself, were present in aspects of circus, whether inside or outside the ring, whether in performance or in promotion. Both circus and sport contributed to and reflected the values of contemporary society. Both forms of entertainment may learn from each other in terms of mutual support, cooperation, training and career possibilities. While we may revere circus as circus, we should not ignore the fact that a vibrant circus industry can generate all sorts of benefits for the wider community, especially for its youth. By fostering the creation and development of local and community circus groups dedicated to one branch of the circus arts, circus can serve the same purpose as sport does in a more general sense. In areas such as, gone too far, in areas such as health and physical fitness, of course, education, social welfare, public order, and the creation of identity, both at a national, local and personal level. So that brings the nature of my talk to a close. I'll just finish off by drawing your attention to my website, The Penny Gaff, which gets a respectable number of hits, and I'm always updating it with new information. If you have anything you'd like to contribute, then please do get in touch with me. And also, just a brief commercial, The Kalino Heart, a 90-minute documentary based on the famous Indigenous Australian circus family, the Kalino family, which I have been working on for many, many decades, will finally be realised in the form of the 90-minute documentary that will premiere at the Adelaide Film Festival on Sunday week, October the 19th. And I would hope that before long you'll see it on television or streaming or somewhere. So please keep your eye open for that, because the archival footage in this, showing what the Kalino family used to do on the trapeze and tight wire, etc., is truly outstanding. So that brings my talk to a close, and also our presentation to a close. We thank you for your attention, and we'll be happy to answer any questions, I think, or complaints, whatever.